Alrighty, let's roll. Hi, I am Chris from Airwindows, and we're doing our Monday live stream. So let me fuss around and get things ready. I don't know if anybody's going to show up, but I'm probably going to need to learn how to do this in such a way that it matters less whether I'm talking to people or not. In particular, if I ever end up getting to do making music on stream, it's definitely going to be chatless. So there's that. And the making of music is kind of interesting because the way that that goes, I've been struggling to deal with getting down to doing that. So there's always a lot of creative block, but the one that I did for Console 0, which is the most recent plugin, was kind of neat. It kind of fell together very easily. And that's cool. It's nice when that can happen. So what I was thinking to do today, which I think it's going to be, I'll chat, I'll answer questions, that usual kind of thing, because I can. I will also show my screen. I'm not sure whether people want to have me showing the screen constantly or what. We'll see. We'll see. I mean, a primary thing is kind of getting used to doing this, not drinking too much coffee and making myself sick or anything like that. And, there's multiple purposes. One of the purposes is it has me coding pretty much every week, and you eventually see what that is as a result. But another thing is me kind of hanging out and talking. And if I go with the doing music, you'll hear the output of the mixer, but not so much talking, and that'll be a separate thing. For now, however, let us see what we can make happen here, and I'll try to keep an eye on chat, as it were, because I do have an idea for something I can do today. And it is not, oh, hang on, I gotta get my, it's the famous mouse pad, the Airwindows composing mouse pad, which is serving a purpose as just being a mouse pad today. Funny how that stuff kind of works out, because I've had these grand notions of things to do regarding interesting ways of composing. But when I did the track the other day, it kind of just, I started out with using the card game I came up with to give me some beginning ideas there, but then I almost immediately dropped all of that and ran with something much simpler. So that's going to be worth experimenting with. However, what I was thinking about today was this. Let me find the drum track I wanted. This is the one. Yeah, I do not know whether there is or will be anybody. You're welcome to show up on screen and ask me anything. Failing that, it might be a little bit dull. I'm not sure whether I should even be showing the this stuff. Let's see. this is what I was experimenting with. So what we've got here is something that is destined to go into future console versions that are not minimalist. And I'm working on forms of EQ that act like either the Abbey Road TG12345 console or the classic Trident A range. And as usual, rather than trying to model all the details of it and thinking that like a cargo callback gives me what I want, I'm looking towards stuff that sounds right in the digital domain and bending it into the shape that will act like these analog desks. For instance, if I get this looping, I got a treble knob, and the treble knob can be kind of dull, but I can also boost pretty effectively with it. So that's the kind of thing that could prove useful. And it's not just a simple boost, there's a lot going on there. You got a high mid control. It's got a very aggressive tone to it. But the high mid also lets you cut real radically. And in fact, I only need this much travel on the high mid. I've got some adjustments to do here. Because this part you don't really hear. You only hear from here down to about there. Because I've got a fancy way of doing it that is a real striking effect. We can demonstrate that also. Let's put this all to more like around 0.5. And I can demonstrate it with a low mid. And that's a real exaggerated sound. But there's still a degree of naturalness to it. And again, same deal. I have a range up to about here, and then it doesn't actually do any more the more I get. I mean, it kind of does, but you also kind of can't hear anything there. Then we have bass. And in any of these consoles, whether that be your classic Abbey Road console, Dark Side of the Moon console, or your Trident A range, these are inductor-based EQs. I've been researching like crazy on some of this stuff. In some cases, the inductors and transformers have been upgraded by more recent engineers building this kind of stuff because they found fault with the original sort of magic components. There were only 13 A ranges ever made, and even fewer of the TG12345. And in learning about the A range, what I found was that people rebuilding them were like, oh yeah, we made new inductors because the old ones, man, they just distorted way too easy. To which I automatically think, wait a minute. That goes along with some of the stuff that I've learned about. So, we can add bass. And the question becomes, can I make this sound and feel like classic mix consoles by doing this kind of thing? Or we can do just low mids. Usually it's more popular to cut those, but the thing I'm mostly thinking about, all of this is off of a bunch of crossover frequencies. The way it's designed, if you have the settings flat, they cancel each other's processing out to the point where you have extremely high fidelity output. And that's something I'm going to build into the results here. So I have these settings, right? Here's a high mid setting. We can set it lower. You can set it much higher. We got our low mid setting. That can be a lot lower, or it could be much higher. And the thing is, this is already altered from what the code actually is. This is me trying to find ways to not have 16 million sliders on one of the Airwindows plugins, because I want to have all of these bands, because that's consistent with what the classic recording consoles had. I've really been digging into some of the studying on these things. For instance, all the looking into the A range and how I've been talking about, like, oh hey, Rush's Permanent Waves was done at this, David Bowie Station to Station. Most likely Ziggy Stardust was tracked on an A range, but may have been mixed on a Sound Techniques. There's just lots of research to do. And on the back of that, I found even more A-range recordings. Did you know that Michael Jackson's Off the Wall, Devo's Duty Now for the Future, and Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Damn the Torpedoes, and Van Halen Fair Warning was tracked on an A range? I mean, that's really something. That is arguably the best sounding Van Halen record. It's ridiculously good sounding, this one. And the closer I get to having this collection of recordings, the records of which I have, and capturing them, which I have done this morning with the Van Halen, by the way, and also Elton John's Honky Chateau, another A-range. If I get those things sorted out, that means that I can get a plugin that functionally acts like these equalizers are supposed to, which is why I'm doing stuff like this. And going, what would I do if I needed to crank the highs and made it so that it was letting through the cymbals? Would my cymbals sound like these records that I know about? If I needed to crank the deep bass, could I make the deep bass sound and act like the bass off of all these different records of wildly different, like Devo, Michael Jackson, and Van Halen, all coming through the same console? Can I recognize the sound off of those? This is a deep bass sound. We can exaggerate it further by taking out low mids. That's arguably too much bass, so let's find a setting. And then we also want those cymbals shinier, so we add treble. And the way this particular code works, the reason I'm able to get effects that are not unlike what you do when you're running into a inductor-based EQ that is distorting is because all of my gain stages here are distortions. Every single channel in this EQ, all the frequency bands, are not being amplified by virtue of just scaling it up. They're all going through their own separate distortions. And you can do stuff like make a giant hole in the drum bass, right? And it limits you a little bit as far as where you position these things. And then you could go through and do a bass guitar track and have that sitting mostly in low mids. And that's that Van Halen mixing the bass and drums trick. Is they would carve a hole in the kick drum. And not that I have a dedicated kick drum mic, but my mics are in front of the drum kit for this. And make a place in the bass drum where the bass guitar fits in and it fills in the frequencies. But doing that on an A range is real different from doing it on like a heavily parametric modern or a DAW or something like that. You can get so detailed and surgical with your modern gear, and that's not necessarily the ideal way of going about it. So what we're going to do, first of all, quit out of there, jump into here, and make a couple of changes. But what I'm thinking about here, let's see, here's my code for all this EQ stuff. I started it on another stream and I'm continuing it here. This is what we will be using. We are also using potentially subsonic bass because we've got a fifth channel. That is not the only channel. The fifth channel is in fact subs. It is what is happening above the bass cutoff frequency, and that's going to have a great deal to do with how I'm positioning stuff like getting the difference between, say, the Abbey Road console and the Trident A range is going to have to do with finding like that sub cutoff and building that in there, because I do not want to do enormous bass boosts with the amount of distortion that goes into them and all that, but then also be boosting subsonic weight. That's not actually what these consoles can do. They can't actually do that. But I also don't want, like, the way I've got it set up, if everything is absolutely flat, it's pass-through. And that includes subs, that includes super low frequencies. So what I'm doing here is I am taking the subs channel and just letting it go through and including it in the final sum of all of this stuff. And this would be our the output of our EQ is adding all of this stuff together again. If it's all flat, first of all, it doesn't run as many stages of processing. What we see here, this is the bass channel, and it's restricted so that it can't break anything, but we have potentially 3 stages of processing, and they are all stacked up, so if we're not using them, they don't get included in the code. We don't need 3 stages of the subtract processing anywhere. Oh, also I have a thing tucked in here. This one's designed so that if you're running at 48K or whatever, it doesn't just filter everything. So I've got the treble boost, right? And that's its own stage. And if we are not running at a high sample rate, I'm not attempting to do the saturation, because all that will do is make guaranteed that it will be aliasing. Other ones I'm not so worried about because they will be filtered. There will be a cutoff and we'll be distorting like high mids, and we'll be distorting it in such a way that you only get a couple of harmonics, so we don't really have to worry about aliasing coming off of pushing the midband too hard, which is good because having some harmonics in that is going to help. But if we're at a low sample rate, guaranteed if you simply distort the highs, they will alias. So we're just not bothering. Only if you're running at 96K do you get the distorted highs, and I'm using the same trick that I was using in console 0, where this EQ, if you're running at a high sample rate, and it's in here somewhere. It's here. So if you're running at a high sample rate, we start off by doing a simple averaging of the 96K stuff, and then we are doing a potentially crazy treble boost of the high frequencies on that, so it can address it a little bit. Plus, since this is saturation, and since the audio of the highs is likely going to be very quiet by nature, it's not going to be throwing harmonics as gleefully as other stuff might. It should all basically work. That's my thing. It will also tend to generate, like, if you were using this and had just upsampled a entire mix that you'd recorded at 44.1K or 48K, and you used the high frequency control on this, you'd be synthesizing harmonics that weren't actually there in a completely legitimate way. You'd be able to get a sound using stuff that wasn't in the original recording. And that could come in handy as well. So we will see. But this is where I'm going with the console emulations in the more complicated way. There's going to be no surpassing console 0 for minimalist stuff. But this is trying to get those analog desks going. And be careful not to drink too much coffee. So where shall we start? Well, excuse me. We should add another comment about what we're doing. That's the thing, is we probably got enough gain in all of this stuff. I think that'll work out just fine. But the subtract never needs the amount of cut that I have in there. The curve is not working. So we're going to try to fix that. I am also curious whether... Hey, Ismail. By all means, if you do that, it's to some extent takes away from what Console 0 has to offer, but you absolutely can. I did. The example that I showed, the bass is running hole 2, and the Farfisa is running slew only. These are minimalist changes, but they are still changes. And the that hat that I was demonstrating with, that hat's actually running into slew sonic. I just wanted to perk it up a little bit, and slew sonic was the most effective way I found to do it. So yes, you absolutely can. with a bit of luck, if you have anything that is either captured or synthesized that's perfect just the way it is, then you let that pass through. But of course you can do process audios and things. Again, I did. It's just a question of how much are you doing. And if you're doing huge amounts of processing and everything, I guess the question is like, why are you bothering running console zero when you could be running something else? Like you could run, well, there's a variety of reasons, I suppose. Like console zero is the first version that has a built-in pan. If I was to use a built-in pan on one of the other ones, it would act like a, how Purist Gain does a gain control that competes with the shifting of bits just by doing its processing differently. And I could also build in a pan control, and that's what I'm working on like right now. Like what I'm working on here is a EQ that is to go into a version of console, one of the lettered versions. And once I'm done with that, it will have a fader and it'll have a pan. And it's not going to be a bit shift style. I'm sorry, I said the word. YouTube's going to get mad at me. A shifting of bit style. But it'll still be there. But yeah, you can do whatever you want with it. It's just a question of whether it's getting you the results you like. I could easily see doing sort of minimalist recordings and maybe not so many tracks and layering them using console zero specifically because it was a sort of minimal, not doing too much stuff kind of recording, like acoustic instruments, or you're using entirely artificial synthesizers, but you're capturing stuff off of analog synths, and maybe you're trying to construct a mix that way. And you don't really have much going on, but you'd like it to be extremely pristine, but not DAW-like, not in the box-like. And at doing that, you could do console zero, and it would probably be a real effective way to get, for instance, I listened to some old Richie Houghton, like Plastic Man stuff. You could probably construct a pretty good Plastic Man style mix in console zero, specifically because everything about that genre sort of supports the great minimalism of it, having it be very simple. And I'm honestly interested in fooling around with that some myself. That might see, who knows, if I feel really gung-ho, maybe I'll do some of that this week. But it might support some of my experiments, and thinking in terms of, rather than filling up all the channels on the board, I probably need to make a new template for Reaper. Because I've got a Reaper template that sets up all of my running through the board. And that's all well and good. It's very nice. If you want to nudge a knob by 0.5 dB, as long as your fingers are delicate enough, you can do it. And it's all completely analog and stuff. But that doesn't mean I couldn't do some things that lean more heavily into where I'm taking the digital world. And that could be kind of exciting. It could be kind of interesting because that leans more into the you can do it kind of, the you can do it side of things. I'm also wondering, oh, never mind, doesn't really matter. I think my voice on the streams, as much as I have to constantly chatter because I'm doing a live stream, the voice is way quieter than when I record it onto the camera. And I don't really know why, because it's not like the mixer on the little ATEM is set to pad everything completely. It's just, maybe it's just a thing. Maybe it's just the way that it's shown. Anywho, I see I got 4 people hanging out with me. That's cool. A half an hour into the stream. Let's get into some more of this. Ask if you want to see what I'm coding. I will totally show you. In fact, let's. This is what I'm coding. I'm putting something in between these. All of these parameters need to go from -3 to 3, and I got to change them to be -1 to 3, because that's how they're set up to work. And the deal with the -3 is that's my frequency band cutting, but it turns out that as soon as I get to one stage of this frequency band cut, it's already as much as I need. It's a process where quiet sounds get a cosine function applied to them, similarly to what I did in PyWacket, the compressor PyWacket. It's similar to if you use the plugin density and put it to negative density all the way. You'll get that sort of hollowed out sound, and some of the spikes and audio still comes through. I find that sounds better for these frequency bands. It makes the sound kind of drop back a little bit when you're cutting, but if you do 3 stages of this sort of cosine function that we're using, it's just way too much. It's completely unnecessary, so I'm taking that part out. I know I'm not going to need it. In fact, if I was going to make it so it's consistent to what actual analog desks had, I probably need to constrain it even more. And the maximum cut I would have would be like -0.3 or 4 or whatever. Like measure it so that so you only can subtract yay much of the audio, and that's the amount of boost and cut you get on the real life board. I might do that. Because it would be a way of distinguishing like the Abbey Road console from the other one that I've been studying, the Permanent Wave, Van Halen Fair Warning, Michael Jackson Off the Wall, Trident Day Range. That's what I was trying to think of. So let's look into this. It's going to be if statements. And I know I have a maximum of -3. If I divide that by 3, it scales everything neatly until it's -1. So I got to go through and do that with each of these. I can afford to do it, however, because we're only doing this once per buffer. This is in the beginning of the process buffer lists. So we figure out what we're doing each time, and then we go through and process the actual buffers sample by sample, and then the next time we come through, I'm probably also going to not be smoothing things other than maybe the fader for a variety of reasons. If I am smoothing the biquads as if they were synth filters, I mean, I can do that. It's not really how people used these old consoles, and it's going to be way more, it's going to chew up the CPU really bad. And when the design of this is that you got to be able to put a channel of it on every single channel, that's going to become insurmountable. People aren't going to be able to run it, so I got to deal with that. Morning, Paul Channel Strip. So where were we? We're copying this. And we don't need to do fat subs, because fat subs is pre-calculated that the loudest it will get is unity gain. We don't boost subsonic frequencies at all. And then although technically we could do something interesting, I am also making it be sum to mono, which is why my limit is 0.5 here. But if we're boosting the super low bass, we're using the same control for that, you see. If we are boosting the super low bass, maybe we want to also pull the subs back just to make the sort of phase shift around that corner frequency be more exaggerated. It's probably worth a try. Let's try that. First, I'm going to make sure that these are right. Get used to being this chatty, because if I do music making streams, I ain't talking. This stuff I can talk. If I start getting inspired, it'll stop making sense, but I'll still be able to talk, kind of. So, what can we do to manage how the subs work? Plus, there's another thing. I could use a sine calculation to make it so that the subs don't drop away as fast. It might be worth seeing what that feels like. Because here's the thing, is if I do this, bear with me while I find the value I want. See, this constant, this is pi, 3.1415, etc., etc. But pi underscore 2 that is half of pi. It's 0 to 1.57. So the way a sine function works, oh, don't worry about distracting me. Like, if I really needed to be coding, I wouldn't be streaming. But yeah, for me, it is more than just doing the coding. This gets things, it keeps things rolling, but Monday streaming is largely about talking to people. And so I'm going to do my level best to talk to people as well as do some of this coding. And we'll do the best that we can with it. I'm limiting myself to 2 hours of it. I am a deeply introverted person, so I start stressing out and stuff, and I have to watch out for my ability to continue to produce. But putting in a couple of hours, especially right after a plugin drops, is just fun and nice, and if people have questions, they can come by and ask. I'm also kind of tending to make it so that if you have questions, the most effective way that you could do to get those answered is to post them on the YouTube video. And I'll tell you why. People posting on the YouTube video is more engagement and more traction with that than I get from anything else, including like Facebook or forum posts. And that includes if people are calling me names or saying mean things on the YouTube video. So, like, thanks, guys. Not that you mean it that way, but... and... that's turning out helpful enough that on the back of the console 0 algorithm, if I look into the YouTube video posted thing, it has done its little fireworks thing where it's like, yeah, you have a #1 video. It's the 1 out of 10 of the most recent videos that you've posted. The next ones I'm going to do are going to be more boring so that I can guarantee that they're not going to be like record-setting videos, just to not stress out about that kind of thing. But I thought it was pretty likely that I could get console 0 to be a fairly big deal. And as a result, YouTube is showing the console 0 video to some really pointless, like, people who are watching weird videos in Chinese, or how to do needlepoint, or very rarely anything remotely relevant. And that's the only way that the YouTube thing works, is they're throwing dumb stuff at you, seeing if people can watch. And most of the people who are watching needlepoint videos or videos in Chinese, they can hit console 0 and go, huh, why am I watching this? And then immediately click away. But it shows that YouTube is kicking in to some extent. So that's cool. That's the thing that's kind of working. I will see. I have, of course, also got other stuff going on that you may or may not have ever noticed. And more will be revealed as far as some of those things are concerned. But just know, not all of the work that I do is work that you immediately see on the Airwindows channel or whatever. Often there's a bunch of other things going on that are not as obvious, or are like secrets for people to discover if you're like the die-hard ultimate Airwindows fan. Or watching the live stream is probably another good place to mention stuff like that. But that also gives me time to pink crocodile. It gives me time to build up stuff that's a lot of work without having to launch it like immediately. And that's also useful in a variety of ways. It means that I can kind of chill out working on stuff that doesn't necessarily have to meet public scrutiny right away. Pink Crocodile, you were reminding me of the Great Super Eye Patch Wolf video about influencers, where he does an entire thing on the end of the video about how terrible it is being a famous YouTuber, which is partly tongue-in-cheek, I think. He's a good actor, so he likes to play up stuff like that. There's some element of truth to it. But he brings up that point exactly, that when you look at your YouTube page, they always make a big fuss of, oh, you're starting to suck, you're not doing as well as you did, isn't that sad? And it's manipulative. It is absolutely there to do exactly what you're talking about. Make you feel bad and make you struggle harder. And if it does that to you, then don't deal with it. Like on the Super Eye Patch Wolf video, one of the people they talk to is Jenny Nicholson, who I have met. I met Jenny Nicholson at BronyCon, but the last one, in fact. But she's the only one who responded and said, I don't really care. It doesn't really bother me because like what I'm doing has nothing to do with that anyway. And there's an element of that from me as well. There is an element of I am absolutely dedicated to doing as much as I can of this stuff that interests me. And I know it's not necessarily mainstream. And because it's not necessarily mainstream, it's pretty ridiculous of me to fuss over whether it like hits the #1 viewership thing every time. If like I can only do that, I'm failing. So, and like I'm not failing. So, speaking of not failing, let's jump back into this for a bit. We've got these various controls. These are various cutoffs. And in this way, we are defined. Yeah, I know, Pink Crocodile. Like, yeah, it's ridiculous. That's the thing is, you gotta remember. I will tell you, and listen to me if you are listening to YouTube too much. You can't take that kind of stuff seriously. Oh no, don't worry about it. This is more important than the actual coding, because as you've seen, I will get the coding done. I will absolutely get the coding done. But the thing about it is, like, if you post something that you're really proud of and YouTube is like, oops, you suck, you have to think of it in the long term. You cannot think of it only in terms of like what's making YouTube happiest. Because I mean, sometimes YouTube is happiest if you're posting like Nazi content or whatever. It's really difficult to tell what it's thinking of. That's kind of what happened to them, I think, is it's not so much about YouTube actively having political beliefs and wanting to push them, but YouTube is an elaborate neural network. It's like an AI. And as such, they've had to get it under control because it started making decisions about like, what can make more people watch YouTube more? What would be good to do that? And it started figuring stuff out like, yeah, make people really panicky and freaked out, or make people really angry at something, and get them into whatever state where they will just consume more YouTube content. And, that's bad for people, but it's good for engagement. So when you post something that you're really proud of and YouTube is like, oops, you suck, they only care about engagement. It's fine to be aware of that. But remember when I'm making stuff, because I make stuff very often, where like with Console Zero, I knew Console Zero. I'm not getting as much flack on Console Zero as I was expecting. I was thinking I was going to get an even harder time with Console Zero than I did. And the reason is it's diving really deep into some of the stuff that I have been exploring. I know that's controversial. So if I'm actively doing better with that stuff, that means some people are going to get mad. I can only serve 20% of the people are really excited about the stuff that I love most. And 30% are really excited about stuff that I absolutely hate and don't want to deal with at all. And so if I do stuff that serves what I actually care about and I'm good at, it's automatically going to piss off more people than it pleases. But I'm not there to serve the people who shouldn't really be paying attention and who are better served by finding something else. I'm there to serve the people who are into the stuff that I'm into. It's like that. It's as simple as that. So yeah. Oh, Fokuma is using Aver Matrix. Yup. You can totally do that. That is a thing. It's possible that I will use that in something in future, although probably not this EQ thing that I'm working on right now. But yeah, you got to decide, am I actually going to be the best damn joke meme video maker? No, you're not. There's people out there who are way better at it and have spent more time doing it and are willing to dedicate their life to it. In these slightly, it might end up with there is a YouTuber, iDubbbz, who left-wingers have been talking about a great deal because he has done this sort of heel face turn by some people's standards, where he was probably the best joke meme guy, edgy dude ever. He was a huge YouTuber on the back of that. And then he was like, wait a minute, people are coming up to me and saying stuff that I don't like. I was just joking. Why are they taking it serious? And he just went and changed everything around. But he's still a better joke meme edgy guy than you. He has got more experience at it and a bigger platform to do it. There's little point competing with that. Why bother? You can be arguably kind of nicer and do the hell is the name of the guy? It's just some of the fun things about trying to do everything at once is that I will get a little bit scattered, but scattered and enthusiastic is made of win. Mr. Beast is the guy I was thinking of. And you could want to be a video about using YouTube profits to give things to people who don't have them in order to share the videos of people being excited and psyched. You can't outdo Mr. Beast at that. He's dedicated his life to it. Not that it's a bad thing to do. It seems fine. But you're not going to replicate him. There already is one. There already is a Mr. Beast. So it's figure out what kind of thing you're really interested in. And just, if you're going to dedicate your life to something, dedicate yourself to diving into whatever it is that you actually value and care about. You can even get into Stoic philosophy. Works best when it is not just be really tough and badass and don't be bothered by stuff. It works best when there's something valuable that you actually care about. And then you pursue that thing that you care about and put your effort into that, then it doesn't matter what YouTube says about your latest video. Your question is internal. Your question is, does this further what I care about or not? If it furthers what I care about, then it was a good day. And you can fall back on that. It really does work. It's actually good. So Paul, why is preserving the mantissa important? Well, the reason about preserving the mantissa and that being important is digital processing tends to take stuff away from the tones I grew up on. Like I grew up on vinyl. At some point I'm going to be starting to show that, but it'll probably be either a dedicated stream for that purpose or a private stream that might be just like, I don't know, Patreon or whatever, or posted and, you know, someplace or other. But I grew up on vinyl records, typically ones that I fixated on stuff that just so happens to be the last wave and top refinements of the analog domain before they started getting into digital. My taste kind of switched off right when it started turning digital. And by that I do not mean like the 90s. No. We're talking like the Police Synchronicity digital. It was mixed into one of the first digital 2-tracks. That's why it sounds as dynamic as it does. It was using primitive digital the way it's supposed to be used, retaining incredibly intense dynamic peaks. And it also sounds digital, and there's this subtle emptiness to it. It's completely stark and punchy and dynamic, and the background is just very spacious and, you know, but then at the same time, there are still those limitations to it. It does still sound kind of digital, even though Synchronicity's mixdown device, I've been doing all this research, this is what I've been doing. The mixdown device for Synchronicity is actually 50K, not 44.1K. It's 16-bit, but it's Delta Sigma encoding like modern high-quality converters rather than the original Sony ones that people were using. It's the Denon, I think. And as such, certain of the dawn of digital recordings actually sounded half decent. They're different. It's the same way in which like a EMU SB1200 sampler workstation doesn't just sound like in the box 12-bit. There's a certain kind of weird bigness to it from doing this very primitive digital and then producing the analog sound, which they have to in order to make a literal vinyl record out of it, and having this really chunky digital processors doing it. Like you can make very chunky digital processors with like ladder DACs, digital to analog converters, through carefully sculpted resistors, and it's just not as accurate as some of the stuff that they do these days. But man, can it put a lot of energy behind your dynamic spikes. And that's what some of the older digital stuff does, is it gets a sound that people are still craving and looking for, not simply because it's degraded and is bad digital, but because it's like bad digital that's being handled in such a way that it has a lot of guts and punch to it all at the same time. But yeah, the mantissa thing, the reason for preserving it, or why to pay attention to that, is that's one of the biggest changes between analog recording and mixing and doing it in a DAW, doing it in your laptop or whatever, is on the whole, even if you try to be pretty minimalist, when you're doing this kind of stuff and you're mixing in the box and doing your EQ and doing your levels and settings and so on, you're doing a lot of calculations, and it takes the input word of the digital signal. And often with a lot of this stuff, if you just did a straight through pass, and we're talking even some rather not good digital systems, ones that wouldn't be considered like really high class, 16-bit and not particularly fancy. But if you are able to take the input, get a good enough input, put it into that, pass it straight through without touching anything to the output and have it, good enough output, you can get really kind of creepily close to what good analog sounds like if you're feeding that sound in. You can feed your vinyl record in, pass it straight through, feed it back out again, and it could fool you pretty easily as to whether that was the original sound or whether it was the digital version. And that is not because all things digital are perfect and wonderful. It's because you didn't touch it. You didn't touch the input digital word that was coming in. You just put it straight through to the output again. And there you go. YouTube keeps complaining about my bit rate. Sorry, I like having a high bit rate. Fukomas. That sounds like a cool vocal chain, honestly. One thing that I kind of miss is that we don't actually have a way of showing chat on live things. I don't know what I'm doing wrong where it's not showing up on the final versions. Maybe I'll look into that at some point. But yeah, when I talk about Mantissa, basically what I mean is that getting as close as possible to that condition where you're taking in the digital audio and passing it straight back out again. Because that's the trick. All of the shifting of bit stuff means is that there's more and more ways I'm figuring out where you can do math operations to get stuff done in the mix, but you didn't actually change the part of it that degrades when you run through a bunch of digital math. How important is that? Well, that's a fair question. Given that all the stuff that I use is on double precision processing, I tried to compare full mixes done using either that or long double processing, and I found I couldn't really tell any difference. And so logically what that means is that I've already got it set up to where I don't actually need to be using Console 0. Console 0 exists so that I could try it out to see what it would sound like if, in fact, it did matter. If, in fact, I could be running everything on long double processing or, indeed, not doing any math functions at all where I could get away with. And Mantissa being where all the magic was captured, yes, it is the input data words unaltered. And that's the trick, is when you start changing them, it starts degrading stuff every single time you touch it. If you're at double precision, it's really pretty good about not hurting. It's really pretty good about still sounding good. It's a question of, like, can you hear literal perfection? And my guess is if you were to test it, no, you can't. I can't either. Nobody can. Can you perceive or get a sort of vibe off of that literal perception if it does in fact provably exist? And I'm finding that you can kind of pick up on that vibe. You'd never be able to tell. Like, you could do a raw digital mix with the same, Console 0 is doing a simple averaging on literally everything several times at 96K. And so you could apply that. And you could do a mix, and the mix would be just a plain ordinary DAW mix because we're not doing things that are that fancy and complicated. And granted, the console style processing is doing something, but you could just skip that and compare a Console 0 mix, which is among the cleaner that you would get out of the stuff that I'm doing, to a raw DAW mix, and some of the time you'd probably not guess right. You wouldn't necessarily be able to pick it out every single time. but there can be a pervasive sense of like whether you're perceiving that literal perfection of how the thing is constructed versus whether you're kludging and compromising and so on. And I think that does matter. You just can't always pick it out. Maybe you even, half the time you can't pick it out. The other half the time you get a sense of, oh, this is not right. And that builds up. And so that's why I do stuff that is more fugitive and certainly couldn't be picked out every time. Paul, I do not think it is possible to do that sort of Mantis-preserving math with something nonlinear, but, and this gets into stuff that I'm doing going forward too, I've already got yet another way of managing. In fact, I think it's at the bottom of this very... No, I guess not. That was another calculation section. I've already got a way of calculating approximations of sines and arcsines that are based on crude implementations of sines. And one of the things that I've done is found out that if you're doing a really perfect sine, then all of your mathematical functions are going to be real specific. It's going to be like, apply this like this, multiplied by that, multiplied by itself, less than this, and then divide the whole thing by 791, and boom. And that's a part of creating the perfect sine, because the math says to do that. But if you have, like, do this and multiply it by itself 5 times, and then subtract this, and then divide it by 513, and you're good. You could be dividing it by 512 instead of 513. That bit becomes a shifting of bits. That bit becomes preserving the mantissa from what you already had. If you don't, then you've got yet another tiny degradation of whatever it is you're working with. And so those are the places I can sneak that stuff in. Those are the places where I can fit in that concept, knowing that I'm like leaning the actual algorithm to be a slightly weird approximation of sine or a slightly weird approximation of arcsine. So it'll still do what console does, but I'm repeatedly doing internal calculations and shifting bits to do them. It becomes retaining a hair more of that sort of raw information while also adjusting bits of it slightly off. And that's an interesting trade-off to make, because another thing about it is nobody else is going to do that. Nobody else would do that. The idea that shifting bits is such a big, important, hairy deal, especially when you already know that you're doing some changes and you've already lost the original mantissa. So why? Why do it? And my answer is because I want to hear what it sounds like, and I'm really interested. And that's how that goes. Mantissa means female fortune teller seers. Interesting. Yeah. Well, bear in mind, Greg, that he said, I never realized how much of digital audio was related to preventing the numbers from getting so complex that they outrun the precision of the machine. Well, usually people don't care about this. And you do care about it when you're doing like scientific math or something, or you're stumbling across the problems. For instance, if you're a Minecraft player, are you old enough to remember the Farlands? Minecraft Farlands is limitations of floating point showing itself. Stuff gets really weird and janky because it's possible to travel so far away in Minecraft in these older versions where those are the limitations that you start running into the issues of, can you place things within a block if you're so many billions of millions of blocks away that the floating point numbers themselves don't have a granularity that small. You can't position things within 1/100th of a block if you're so far away that the resolution of the literal floating point numbers that you're using are only, multiple blocks apart. Everything starts falling apart and breaking, and that's what Minecraft Farlands is. Minecraft Farlands is literally the floating point math screwing up. Paul, don't worry about it. Getting in the weeds is what these streams are all about. And it's a good thing to do. I won't always do this. I don't know if I'd want to do this all the time. I suppose if it became wildly popular, which it's not, that I could consider it. But I don't know if I'd want to be like streamer type person where my job is I show up and I talk to the camera and my chat. But for the time being, getting into the weeds is what Monday stream is all about. That said, let me continue fussing with this a little bit more, because I have done one of the things that I said I was going to do. I have limited the cut to 3, -1 to 3, which is what this calculation does. And I was gonna do an experiment on the subs, which would tend to have the effect of increasing the phase shiftiness around the bottom corner of the base if you cranked it up as far as it would go. While also, if you cutted it back as far as it would go, it would also cut the subs to 0. So here's what I was going to do with that. I've already done part of it. So if we have subs being, and part of this is wrong. You probably don't see the part that I'll have to change, but there's a part that I'll have to change. So this goes from 0 to 1.57, etc., etc. That is where I clip stuff using sine so that it clips at the maximum amount rather than wrapping around and coming back down again. But one of the things that we were talking about is, can I make this subs attenuate? To do that, I need to use pi. Now, fad sub starts out as 0, and if you cranked that the base control, which is param4, up all the way, this is the guts of what's going to become the versions of console that are acting like things like a Trident A range or the Abbey Road desk. This is what's going to go into doing that kind of stuff, because this is as close as I can get to sounding like those classic EQs from those machines. And it's probably, you could say that this is probably closer to K-Pultec, except for that you don't really boast with Pultecs. There's are more about passive cuts, and so it's more about mimicking the stuff you can get up to with those old desks, and it's going to be tuning it by ear and just getting the overall sound to be in the zone before restricting it until it is contained within the ranges that we are allowed. Anywho. Now we have 0 to 3.1415, etc., etc. Technically what that means, if I run this into a sine, it means it will go from 0 to literally 1, back down to 0 again at full crank. And I had previously had it so that it was limited to 0.5, that being the max boost. And then if I had it pushed beyond 0.5 and I started boosting the bass, it was going to leave the subs where they were. And now what we're going to do is we're going to have it so that it can leave the subs where they are for a while, but the more you push, the more it starts cutting the subs back. They're also mono, but that's a whole other story. that should exaggerate the cutoff of how the bass hits the subs. And to do that, we no longer use this if statement. This is going to go away. Excuse me. One downside of not hurting myself with drinking too much coffee is I just yawned. It ain't one thing, it's another. And that does it. So now what we've got is this control is doing my -3 to +3, except for it's -1 to +3. There's stuff that I can take out of the algorithms now. And then this subs thing in here, that's meant to go from 0 to 0.5 because I'm doing a monoing thing on it. And then back to 0 again. But rather than being perfectly linear, all the stuff around the center is still going to be pretty much non-cut. So if you do subtle boosts, you subtly boost the low band, but the subs kind of stay where they are. And then if you cut, you're cutting the bass, but the subs kind of stay where they are a little more than you might think, but they're mono. And we multiply by 0.5 because we're making them be mono, and that's part of how that works. Yeah, Fortis, the interesting thing about it is that JVC, or I think it's JVC, the digital converter that was used on synchronicity was in fact delta sigma. That's how they made that. It was 50K, and it was delta sigma. And that's how they had that sounding better than the Sony of the day. And I think that is true. I think that it is a different kind of musical quality, but it kind of works. It's not quite the same sound as the dawn of digital Sony stuff that they were doing. And it's not the same as the latter DACs either, but, you know. And yeah, that's what you hear. If you go between... from the sounding of it, I think that Ghost in the Machine was not mixed to digital, but Synchronicity was. I mention that because Ghost in the Machine is also one of my Trident A range ones, but may not have been. Much like how Permanent Waves by Rush is Trident A range. Moving Pictures maybe, and Signals is definitely SSL. Yeah, there's many questions from all this. Trying to figure it out and know what I'm talking about with that stuff helps me identify when I can do things like go, okay, so what does the guitar sound for Permanent Waves and the guitar sound for Fair Warning from Van Halen have in common? And the guitar sound from like Honky Chateau or Goodbye Yellow Brick Road from Elton John. If there's a characteristic factor between all of those and they have the same kind of mojo to them, and I can get that into a plugin, I win. I nailed it. But yeah, so this is what we need for the subs. And now that we have that stuff set up, we now have some changes to make here. All this stuff where it's, if it is less than 0, then we no longer need to care about some of these things. It will never be less than -1, for instance. So I'll be deleting some of this stuff, including this here. So this is the only one that retains. So I got to move some of this stuff around too. like that. And then it's never going to be this, so we don't need that. All of this code will now never be run, so we don't have to worry about it. Make it a little bit simpler. And if I do this with it, the way it highlights shows me that I've got the right bit selected. And here's our high mid, same deal. Our sign calculation is actually easier to fed. If I wanted it to boost that even more, I could. I could make stage after stage after stage of this calculation. It would be kind of crazy, but it would work. But same deal. High mid, we do not have to cut it in the way that this is outlined. So we move that down there. This is the one we're keeping, and this is the one we're not keeping. Yep. Yep, console 0 will darken stuff even at 192K. Not super much, but I mean, that's kind of the gist of the thing is let's make this more natural. If you think that darkens stuff, you should see what's going to end up happening with some of these. This emulation of classic analog consoles, because one of the things I'm doing, I know what made these things work. I know what made these things huge hits in their day. People made these records hit records from how they sounded when they came out on vinyl. I'm making reference of capturing the vinyl, which I have, and analyzing that. That's going to include designing the entire system so that it's not pushing a bunch of 30K signal or whatever. It's going to be a lot like console 8 in that the whole system is going to be designed so that even if you crank the treble, you're not pushing like 30K. It's going to tend to top out around 16 or so. There's going to be a level of darkness, and it's going to give in the box those sound stagings, those abilities to mix aggressive, dynamic, punchy, bright, edgy sounding thing, but it still sounds like a place that you're in rather than mosquitoes chewing the insides of your ears. And that's a choice. That is a choice. I do not remember whether distortion used sample averaging for darkening. Yep. I actually have the first Van Halen album on vinyl. I could grab that as well. It depends upon whether people get completely excited about the idea of hanging out with me and listening to records in a private secret stream. I could probably do that. We shall see. So what did I just do? Cosine stages. Good. Low mids. Same deal. This needs to move. The sound will never be fat, low, mid, less than 1, because we've restricted them all to be only 1, so it ends up being this little bit here. And then we got bass. It's the same pattern, but I like the fact that this is getting smaller. I also got somebody derping around outside doing something. I don't know what, they're down the street. Low mid done. Bass done. If at bass less than 1. And we'll never have this. And so this is what we end up doing. And then this is where we take the subs band, which is the remainder of our movable, adjustable bands. And we just always sub them. We always sum them because I'm basing this entire thing off of people's experience of classic analog records, and you couldn't have subsonic out of phase in classic analog records, nor does it even help you regarding listening to stuff in stereo. mean, it's out of phase subs are not your friend, no matter who you are or what you're doing. But we multiply it by fat subs, so we were going to attenuate it if we boost bass enough. And this is what we're now going to hear. Let's build this. And build succeeded. Maybe we'll spend the rest of the stream playing with it. Older item. Let's replace that. I will need to build it again if I want to make that. But this is going into other things, so we might never actually see a standalone fat EQ because it's becoming the building block for how we do it. Over to sounds. We'll load up those drums. Then we can load up pieces of music, just full mixes of other kinds of things. And now that we've got that, let's hear what we have. Center everything. It sounds about normal. We can still boost highs a lot. I think this is a good way of attenuating. It's not the most obvious on the treble, but I bet we can hear the low mids pretty effectively. Oh yeah. So the adjustment I made was working well. I can put in another limitation here so that you can never pull it all the way back. Here's our center frequency, the high mids. Taking out the high mids is working. If I boost them, yep, that's high mids. Lastly, bass. So cutting all the way should be taking out all my bass. Let's change the low mid frequency up a little bit. So there's our low mid frequency with the bass cut all the way. Let's get something going. That's bad drum playing. Let's go back to this. That was one of the worst takes. Anyways, so we're hearing low mids. And here's bass and subs. So if we cut all of that stuff, so we're only hearing the low bass. Then, what's our boost sound like? Again, at 0, we have the bass passing straight through and the subs passing straight through. If we cut all the way, we cut both bass and subs to nothing. And that's the corner frequency of the low mid, such as it is. But if we boost bass, we start getting, not only boosting the bass more and more, and distorting it more and more, but we also start to fade out the subs, even though they are still in mono. And at full crank on the bass, we have no subs left at all, which theoretically should be highlighting the corner frequency between bass and subs. So let's hear what that sounds like again. That's good and deep. I think it worked. I think it's working. So if I drop low frequencies, we're dialing the bass into a smaller and smaller area. Until we can't really do anything with it anymore. So it has to be higher than this. And here's bass alone. Everything else is cut off. I'm actually pleased that it cuts all of everything down to nothing. Means you can really kind of cancel everything out a lot. But yeah, a low mid frequency. Because here's the thing, as we are hearing this extremely deep bass off of just drums, if I am modeling the Abbey Road console, I need to be able to do Dark Side of the Moon on it, meaning that I must also, as well as be able to get the kick drums acting the way that the Dark Side kick drums sound like, I also have to be able to take the sound of a big old fluffy bass drum beater pressed into like a parade kick drum. Boom, 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 and make the heartbeat sound out of it on this EQ. So this gives me a bit of a hint of what that might be like. It's just cutting everything out. Outtakes would be more like. This is the full everything. This is not just the kick. High mid will get you the outtake sound. But yeah. So several things going on here. And one of them is that this design must be able to get me that Dark Side of the Moon heartbeat sound by virtue of taking the same type of sound, or simply a kick drum, and making it have the same sort of rumble, the same kind of whoomp going on. I'm not convinced that I should be taking out all of the subs to do that. So that's just a raw sound. Do I have a place where I can hear a kick by itself? Hello. Hi there. Kick is all by itself there. As far as the curve stream is concerned, I just kind of enjoy it. I'm not sure it's worth it. It was the kind of splurge thing that I will sometimes do simply because I'm like, I will spend all of my time in front of this, and so therefore. Also note that it's not an Apple, obviously, because Apple doesn't make curved screens. I'm not going for a super high performance Apple screen. The laptop, well, not this laptop screen, because this is the vintage one. But the modern laptop screen may very well be more accurate than the curved screen. That's not necessarily my best screen as these things go. It's okay, it's good enough. But as far as, one of the reasons that I like it though, you know how I have occasionally done unusual aspect ratios? Here, just a second, let me do this thing. We are now going to try to make the Pink Floyd heartbeat sound out of this kick drum. Something like that. Because one of the things I'm going to look into, maybe before I end stream or just in general, maybe next week, because I know that I'm going to be posting something that's just like maintenance release of plugins next week. So we're not getting a big spectacular console version next week. But one of the things I may do is the next idea from this stuff. That I have just done that, I think, successfully. I would like to dial in some of this stuff differently. Because what I've got here is an initial approximation of what I was trying to make happen. See how I've got like freak high mid, freak low mid, freak bass, freak sub. That is because I am dividing stuff up, and I thought I would make things simpler by having the mid-range bands approximate to a single control centering on the band. But these are not parametric bands. These are like constructive solid geometry bands. They're done by subtracting from each other, so they can add back together again to be unaltered sonics if you haven't done radical things with them. Oh, I remember I was still answering your question about the curved screens. You know how I've been working with aspect ratios? That first video of the Welcome to Free Luna album was a super widescreen video, and it's uploaded as a super widescreen YouTube video. If I put that full screen on that screen, I get the Welcome to Free Luna video taking up the entire screen exactly as it should. It was designed to be that particular widescreen because that's a 21:9 widescreen. Oh, Lorenzo, I'm happy to hear that. Lorenzo is like, I tried Console Zero in my weird mastering band split method. It makes everything more 3D in an awesome way. Cool, cool. Remember, there's the level where you are enjoying and getting a vibe off of the thing. There is another level that is coarser where you can prove it. So if you're doing stuff where it's like, I made this change and it made things more 3D in an awesome way, then you can be guided by stuff like that. Just make sure never to take yourself too super seriously when you explore things like that, because I think it's just fine to explore how to make stuff sound more 3D and vibey and experiment around and chase after what works. You kind of have to. You can't make all your decisions by blind testing. But by the same token, you're exploring around at the thresholds of perception where you can get stuff wrong. So remember, if you have second thoughts and go, wait a minute, I'm not sure if I like this anymore, then, try going back. You're exploring the realms of inspiration. You're exploring the realms of, does this work out for me? And it's important to be willing to try to sense stuff beyond the trivial and obvious. And that's how you can get into a zone where maybe you second guess it. Maybe you think the other thing that I used to do was better after all. That's all fine. It's all good. Yeah, and remember, if you're trying to make sounds more distant in 48K, there is also simple, the average plugin. Now, as far as the console system, that would be the same as Aver Matrix at exactly 2 steps of averaging, but multiple stages. I think there's 4 stages in total on the entire system. So it really wants you to be at 96K, and it'll be a little bit soft and rolled even there. And if you were trying to do that at 48K, you'd be using either 4 instances of average, or you'd be using Aver Matrix 2 steps, you wouldn't have that 10K dip because you wouldn't be doing an averaging window of wider than that. And multiple stages will get you there. So let's see where we're at now. Guess what? Frequency high is going bye-bye. Because, and these other things are changing too, but because we're simplifying some of this. And we want frequency low mid here. And these are, you know, I don't even need all of these parentheses, do I? Let's not have them. And frequency base. Because I had those controls moving 2 different biquad filters at the same time. Those controls in there were moving 2 different things simultaneously. And we're not going there at the moment. We are going to do something else. Excuse me. So what we're referring to now is the frequency cutoff where the following thing begins. So frequency sub is the point where the base channel bridges over to become the subsonics channel. Frequency high mid is the point where the high mid turns into the treble channel. Treble channel is the very top bit. We start by generating frequency high mid and then subtracting that from the sound, and what we've got left over is the highs. So the highs end up being as close to untouched as we can get, and all the remaining ones increasingly start getting involved in successive approximations and successive biquad filters and so on, and we're going to see what we can do with all of this. Might do the trick. My hunch is that this is the way to do that. And we're going to do something else. What was I going to call this? I was going to call it stretch. And we're going to make it param 5. And then the rest of this stuff goes away, but not forever, because we're going to get back to it. And at some point I'm going to check and make sure that it still works. But for now, we're just making this stuff happen. So what's going to happen here is this. I want to set up some frequencies. For instance, these are in hertz. They're divided by sample rate. They are the way that we're getting this kind of thing. I think that's how that works. Yeah, that'll get us, because sample rate is like, if it's 44.1K and our frequency high mid was 20K, 20K divided by 40.1 is a little less than 0.5. The biquad filter must have a frequency of less than 0.5 to work. We will get it that way. And if we have some very high frequency sample rate, like 96K, it will be that much smaller. It will correctly line up. So we can spell out what these frequencies actually are. So let's start by saying $12K is where high mids turn into highs. And where do low mids turn into mids? Let's call that 800 hertz. And what we're going to do is figure out ways where we can have these things set to what the corner frequencies of the various consoles used. Because each of these, here's the theory behind this. in the last 15 minutes of my stream. I may actually get it working, or I may not. But the idea here is that people tend to go for the same. Let's do the quick check to make sure that it still works before continuing. We didn't use stretch, that's fine. Double check that we still have audio. Different sound. Like for instance, what can we use? Twilight Sparkle, that it is very bassy. And Discord's Welcome Home, yeah. Guitars and stuff. I have not installed Repack in SWS extension photos. Bear with me. I'm working on lots, as always. Fatty Q. Let's double check that this still works. These no longer do anything. Treble. Highs. Oh yeah, that's crunchy. A little bit. That's kind of basic. Bass. That's deep. Okay, it works. I'm not happy with my frequencies, but it works. But that's the whole point, is I need to look into these frequencies a little harder. Like the point where bass turns into sub clearly should not be 60. That is too low. Here's the thing. I want to have one control to adjust all of the all of those little adjustments on like a trident A range. You got controls for basically everything, right? You've got low passes and high passes overall for everything. You've got frequency for where the high frequency boost sits. You got frequencies for where the mid-range does its peaky kind of thing. You got frequencies for everything. The total of them would be like 18 sliders. That's not very practical. So what I'm going to do is get into a zone where I'm identifying ways that I can set up a single control to voice the entire channel. Not the entire mixing console, mind you, but the entire channel in specific ways. Because I think what happens, having listened to stuff like, for instance, with the A range, I have listened to Michael Jackson. I have listened to Van Halen. I have listened to Elton John. Everybody gravitates towards different settings of these switches. And it's known that one of the important things about that, or at least some folks claim, and I agree, it's important that these are not like controls where dial in the place where the mid-range sits. No, they're switches. You get 4 choices, that's it. There are reasons why that matters. One of the reasons is the tone sounds a certain way when you're using an inductor-capacitor combination to get your mid-range or whatever happening. And we're in digital, that doesn't apply to us. If I can get the inductor-capacitor kind of sound going on, I can put it anywhere I want. But the other reason is, much like console 0, it's less fiddling. And again, I feel like I am observing with listening to multiple, not so much on the Abbey Road console, not so much in the TG12345. Kinda, but it really shows up on the Trident. People seem to make their bands cluster around the mid-range, But then if they're trying to exaggerate the boom and tinkle factor, if they want to do that Dark Side of the Moon heartbeat sound and stuff, for Elton John is a good example of this, because the Elton John sounds, man, they really like the super highs, they really like the super lows. Bands that could be in the mid-range, the entire album seems to set them up to stretch them. If you're going for the super lows, you're probably also going for the super highs. I can make one control to spread the entire set of frequency bands. Because remember, this is not tied exclusively to the entire mix. It'd be interesting if you did, but if it is problematic to set it up so that our super lows and super highs on this drum kit is exactly right, but then, this doesn't apply as well to our bass, you can tighten in the bass, have it be more focused on the mids. And so, stretch is going to be the factor where every single one of these band center points stretches from the closest in setting to the widest far out setting. And as you move it, one control broadens the entire frequency range, and you'll be able to nudge it, you'll be able to move it in small amounts. In so doing, the entire sound of the EQ transforms. Hopefully that will be, because again, I'm doing this stuff to make tools that are useful to use. Other people can make stuff with all of the little controls in the right places, with the right colors, and the settings of the knobs are labeled correctly, and they go to this. I'm trying to get the feel of this stuff. I'm trying to get something that's functional and works like the classic consoles worked. And so I think that's going to give me a lot more mileage, and it's also going to mean that will give me the distinctness of being able to use the same techniques to do the TG12345 and the Trident A range, both of which are 4-band parametrics, if I remember correctly. And I can also, when it comes time to do the red, the Beatles tube console, I might be minimizing it and have it be a 3-band EQ or whatever it is that they had, but I use the same basic technique. Well, let's see whether I can get something that kind of works that way. It's not going to be correct, that's for sure. But and I don't have all of my details yet. Do I have any of this in notes in some way? I don't think so. Do I have notes in sounds? I think those are sounds. Don't care about that. All of my notes in various places. Yeah, don't think I have. That's okay, I'll dial this in later. Let's just pretend, for starters, that the crossover point for the high mids could be as low as 6K. Then let's adjust the labeling while we're at it. Otherwise I won't remember. And this one goes away. We'll wind up with a fairly manageable looking little plugin. Then you'll have your gain and your pan and stuff. We will not have things like aux sends out of the plugin because they're designed to work as a normal plugin, but you can use aux sends in other ways. It'll be fine. Well, might as well keep that clarity. And so 6,000 up to probably about 14K. No, let's make it as... These are not the steepest of filters, so 8 and 8 is 16, so and that's how we do it. That's the top frequency. The bridge between the top and the low frequency is going to be a much smaller change. But you know what? Shouldn't be crossing over as low as that. Let's just kludge these things in, and every single one is going to be moved, including the subfrequency. But it's not necessarily the most obvious way of arranging it. And they're certainly not all going to be, in fact, these are going to be subtract, because they need to be pushed higher. Okay, okay, I know what I'm doing now. So base starts out as high as 150, subs start out as high as 40. If you drop the crossover sub frequency down as far as that, let's drop the sub down to, well, I'm questioning. Trying to figure out what to do. Here, let's show you the screen. So here we've got our stretch, and that is going to go from 0 to 1. We know what that's going to do. So high mids. High is the lowest stretch. Everything's going to be mid-rangey and jammed together. And it'll be 8K, but it'll push to 16K at maximum push. That's going to make stuff real bright and tinkly. Low mid is like the center crossover. I am feeling like we want to expand that outwards so that if we stretch as far as we can, our high mids are going to kind of be the center for everything. And they're probably, if you are not intentionally, like because any of these bands could be like the nice, plain, not distorted, not weird kind of things. So we can have either any of these be sort of the fundamental center of everything. And if we have the bridge between high mids and low mids starting at 12K, at this point we start subtracting, not adding. So there, that is also a thing. And then these need to not be these large numbers. So between high mids and highs, which is what we're looking at there, goes from 8K to 16K, real high. Low mid and the median will be 12K, which is pretty bright on us. All of this might be adjusted based on which thing I'm trying to adjust. I just want to get something that sounds like a thing. Bridge between low mids and high mids starts real high up, but then it needs to drop quite a lot as you extend it. Because if we're real mid-rangey, then those mid balances are very much focused in what's most obvious to the ear. Like you push the high mids and it's very much treblier. You push the low mids and it's very much boxier. But as you expand that outwards, I'm going to need the low mid to drop so that you're more able to cut it while still having bass, rather than cutting it and then you only have bass and treble. You need to have some punchy mid-range as well as bass when you crank this out all the way. So what point does low mids give way to highs at the max? Like 800, 400? So if we're doing this one thing at a time, 1200 minus 200, that gives us 1K. (800 hertz), 600 hertz, 400 hertz at max stretch. We'll see how this acts, because I'm going to just wildly play around with it. Bass, 150, and it'll go down, you know, subs go from 40 down to quite low. 20 to, we'll cut them off at 10 at max stretch. We'll do a really major push. Or 10 or 15. Let's see what 10 feels like. I mean, my subwoofers here will kind of show me that, so let's see. We want to make it so that we can approximate that dark side of the moon heartbeat thump. And I've got a sound to do it. Bass goes from 150, and that needs to go down quite a lot lower. (150 minus 100) means it will cross over at 50 hertz. Let's see what that gives us. So yeah, what we've got is a stretch control, where as you push it, the highs go off into the stratosphere and everything else tends to shift down. And we will try that, and I'll show you what it sounds like, and then I will bid you good day. Having made some progress with this. Firstly, let's play with that heavy rock sounding thing. Oh yeah, we are watching that. So we have no stretch. This shouldn't change anything. All cancels out. Nothing happens. Now, you can start cutting or pushing. For instance, high mids. Stretch. Treble low. Stretch. Cancel everything else out. We're still hearing subs out of this too. It's interesting. There's a lot of weird interactions here, which I think is not a bad thing. I like it. Let's not cut everything quite as hard as all that. No stretch. Lastly, bass. No stretch. It's pretty loud. Nothing but thunder. Let's put those drums back again. That's what I was going to fool with. I do have those sounds in here where, because that track is so hot that it's overdriving the EQ on every band. Like, imagine if it was having all little inductors and stuff inside it. That mixdown is going so high into the track that you'd kind of need to pad it, because all the little inductors and things would be distorting. So I'm happy with that, but that's no way to audition this. Kick drum. Without anything happening, doesn't matter what we do with stretch. if we have that centered as well, it should be fairly normal. So let's hear what that sounds like. That sounds like highs. So far, so good. High mid. I'll buy that. Low mid. Again, I think that's low mids. Bass. Now let's fool around with that stretch control. With no stretch, that's still acting kind of MIDI. For instance, if I was doing the red console, I would be probably doing bass boosts that were acting like this. Not so much the super lows that you could get out of the TG 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if we were going full dark side of the moon, and then as we pull it back, shifts down, and it's same with the highs. If we're really pushing the lows extremely, we're also making the highs be super high frequency. Whereas if we don't have as much stretch, everything kind of comes together. I'm not sure that would, no, I guess it was. Oh yeah, because we don't have nearly as much. Zoom in. And then hearing actual drums. With very little stretch. We can put a little slap in the mid-range, cut the low mids a little bit. And bear in mind you can do this on a single track, and you'll be usually doing it on a single track. So as we stretch this from this very mid-rangey, extremely mid-centered one, we're getting more of a normal, like, raw kick drum mix thing going on. And then as we stretch even farther, we do tend to have to exaggerate stuff. See, all this is going to be dialed in its own way. So now we've got extreme lows and extreme highs with the stretch pushed as far as it will go. High mids relatively normal, which is usually what you'll want unless you're trying to get some kind of guitar and make it raucous. And then pull back the stretch. We're bringing it more kind of into the zone. Push the bass, not push the cymbals quite as hard as that. Hi-hats. There's our brightest, shiniest hi-hats. Put a little top on them. Lows on the kick. Take away a little more of those low mids. Highs just a little bit aggressive. Remember, it's a distortion, so it's going to set stuff forwards. And now that we've got that going, we'll scooch everything a little bit more garagey. And it will stretch everything a little bit more like, you know, Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon-y, extended, widened, exaggerated. I think this is workable. There's stuff we can do here. One final thing I do want to try, however. I want to listen to what the mid-range does on guitars, so let's bring up that other one again. And not that, that is raw signal. I'm talking about something like here, where I can just sample this middle stuff. Actually, no, that's bass. Yeah, the whole thing is going to be kind of a little bit too loud, but ideally it will sound like what it sounded like if you ran stuff too loud into the actual machinery. So let's focus on the bass a little bit. Get the bass kind of nice and spunky this way. Little edge there. That's pretty direct. You could use that bass sound. It's a weird sound, but you can use it. And I will do the opposite, which is if we were trying to do a Van Halen mix and taking the bass and having it sit entirely in the low mids and stay out of the way of the click and the rumble of the kick drum. Let's see if we can make that happen. To hear what the guitar sounded like. Those. Although, let me be sure not to save this. It's so loud that I need to dial it back in order to be able to work with it. And we have a volume knob on this, so. So if we were trying to work with these guitars, what might we do? Well, you don't usually want incredibly bright, jittery highs on guitars. So you might hold the treble back a little bit. And then if you wanted them to really grind, you might throw high mids in when they really chug. brighter like this by shifting the high mids top range up, or we're dialing the top end a little bit. And we can have them sit sort of in the mid-range so that they can take up some space and be punchy. And we can do that, or we can try to bring out the lows so that they're more thunderous. And that gets them kind of metally. You're hearing the bass in there too, but... And do not save changes. And there we have it. So, I think it's been a pretty good day. Been a pretty good day of work. I hope folks have enjoyed hanging out and doing this. I see that the numbers are declining, but you don't have to keep up with this as long as I do. I have to do this all week long, and you only have to hang out for a couple hours with me. I'm going to go off and play Minecraft or watch videos or do something or whatever, but all the same, I think this is grounds for being able to do some decent work going forwards with this technology. And I'll see you next week. Next plugin is going to be a sort of maintenance one. It's going to be something like, I don't know, MV2, or I do have a new version of Infinity coming out. It's designed so that I could do sounds that are a little more like the backgrounds of burial tracks, but I don't know whether people are going to like it better or less than Infinity itself. I think that's the one. But I just know that it is different. So either that, it was either Infinity or it was Galactic I can't keep track anymore. I have a plugin coming out next week. It's not going to be the most exciting thing in the world, but it might be a useful tool. And on that note, I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.